to come up with innovations vocabulary, there are essentially three things you can do. One is make up a totally new word, okay? That's from scratch. Another is borrow from another language. Now, languages do this all the time. If two languages are in contact, and one language has a word for a concept which doesn't initially exist in the other language, but then they decide that they need to use it, very often a borrowing will take place. But the borrowing is always filtered through the borrowing language's phonology, which is to say you have to adapt it to what you can pronounce. So the Japanese word for football is futobaru. Okay, that is football filtered through Japanese phonology. Futobaru. Okay. So Navi does the same thing in relatively rare cases. So the Navi don't have gunships, okay, but gunships exist in the movie, and it would make sense for the Navi to need a term for that after the sky people have landed, because they see gunships. Okay, so what's the Navi word for a gunship? What we simply did is take the English word gunship, filter it through the Navi pronunciation system, and it comes out kunsip. An even simpler name is book. Okay, the Navi is not a written language, and so like many languages on Earth, it's simply a spoken language, and communication exists. Spokenly, it's handed down orally. So they don't have a word for book, but they encountered books through Dr. Grace Augustine's classes. So what's the Navi word for book? It's po. Okay, there's no B in Navi. The closest letter is P. And so book in English becomes book in Navi. Okay. The third way is to take existing elements in the language and combine them into words. So these are like compounds. So the word for computer in Navi is eltu lefnga. Eltu means brain, lefnga means metallic. So a computer is a metallic brain. That's okay. There are people who know the language so well that not only could they ask words, please give us a word for this, please give us a word for this, but they could say, hey, what about this word, what about that? They would actually come up with vocabulary themselves because they know the rules. So I said to myself, hey, wouldn't it be great if the fans could suggest a word and I would accept it, and then years later they would hear it on the screen and you're going to say, hey, that's my word, that's my word. So we now have a system where there's something called the LEP, the Lexical Expansion Project. There's a whole hierarchy, there's a rotating chair. I mean, I had nothing to do with this. The fans totally set up on themselves. And every so often, I get a document which contains suggestions for new vocabulary. Not just requests, but actually suggestions for new vocabulary. And I can do one of three things. I can say, I love it, it's fantastic, it's in the language. I can say, basically a good idea, I think we need to tweak it a little bit. Or I can say, I'd like to do this a different way. Everything is submitted to me totally anonymously so that I have no sense of who submitted, so that there's no sense of ownership and rejection if I don't like it. As a matter of fact, I was asked for, so for example, I was asked to create a word for fan in the sense of someone totally committed to something, an incredible enthusiast. And so we had a word for a verb for to be enthusiastic about something, which is soha. And one who is enthusiastic would be a sohayu. And one who is extraordinarily enthusiastic is a ansohayu. So, so you folks would all count as ansohayu. Yeah. The word for hello is notoriously difficult. It's kante, which is kind of tricky. There are some words that are a lot easier. Thank you is irayo. And by the way, that's a James Cameron word. That was one of the original words that he had come up with. And so that is not, that's fairly accessible, I think. The things that are hard, typically about the language, and really about any language that you're studying, whatever is not in your language is going to be a little more challenging than stuff that's very familiar to you. So, for example, as we mentioned, the NG sound, putting that in the beginning of a word is a challenge. These ejectives, which are probably the most quote-unquote famous part of the language, or unusual part of the language that people have been talking about, which I've notated as PX, TX, and KX. These are sort of popping consonants that sound like ah, ooh, eh. And if you listen carefully to the dialogue in the movie, you'll hear some of these. They're called ejectives. They're perfectly legitimate sounds that are found in a lot of human languages. They're found in Native American languages. They're found in parts of Africa. They're found in parts of Asia and so on. They're unusual to most speakers of Western languages. And so that is a bit of a challenge. How do you say, oh? Well, the way I've been explaining it, in fact, I actually found this explanation online a long time ago. It'll be spelled TXU, ooh. So in order to pronounce it accurately, the first step is to make a T sound as loudly as you can without breathing. So it'll be, okay? And then you add the vowel. So it's ooh, ooh. And then as you practice it, you shorten the gap between the consonant and the vowel. So you begin with ooh, and then shorten it, ooh, ooh, and eventually, ooh. And so that's what most people have done to so it's two syllables. Kal is easy enough. Kal. K-A-L, Kal. And that's the very first thing on the list. So the TXI, two parts of it. There's a consonant and there's a vowel. The vowel part is perfectly familiar to me. It is I. It's a vowel in sit, big, pick, whatever, perfectly. What's tricky about it is that vowel in English does not occur at the end of a word. It's always followed by a consonant. But in Navi, it can occur at the end of a word. So it's I, which is not hard. And the TX, I, and then eventually I, and eventually I. Then you put it together, I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years now, and so it's become fairly natural to me. In the beginning, it wasn't easy for me either. But it is something that you can practice, and it's something you can work on. And people do it, and people get a lot better. Yeah. As I may have mentioned, one of the things that I noticed when I was looking at the prototypes of the Navi is that they have 4 digits on each hand rather than 5. And it occurred to me that that would imply that their counting system would be based on 8 rather than 10. And so I asked James Cameron about it, and he said, absolutely. So the Navi counting system is octal rather than decimal. In other words, it's based on groups of 8s rather than groups of 10s. So the way you count is 1 to 8 is ao, more, e, sing, mr, poka, kine, vol. 9 is 8 and 1, volao. 10 is 8 and 2, vomu. That kind of thing. So everything is based on 8. What I've given there is the ordinary decimal number, and then how it would be written in octal. So in octal, the number 8 would be written 10, because the placeholders are not 1, 10, 100, but 1, 8, 64, right? What's 64 times 8? Whatever.
we're word people.
Okay.
Keep looking.
Yes. Okay, so the word for Pandora, which you see in the middle of the bottom list, is Ewa Eveng. Ewa Eveng. That's a compound. It actually means child of Ewa. So Eveng is the word for child, and Ewa is Ewa. There are 2 forms here. Ewa Eveng is the proper dictionary form, A hueveng is a short form which is colloquial and perfectly acceptable. There's a singular, a dual, a trio, and a plural. Plural is 4 or more. So to say, I see you to one person is wangati, kami at 2 people, well mengati, 3 people, well engati, and to 4 or more people, well angati.
Why make it that complicated?
Why not? I wanted to do interesting stuff with the language, but not outlandish stuff. So I think virtually everything in the language will have some counterpart to an existing language on Earth. So as people have noted, there are little parts of the language that work a little bit the way Hebrew works, a little part that work the way Persian works, little parts of the language work the way Chinese works, and so on. That's not a coincidence because I think typically, at least I think for many language creators, including myself, the things that are most readily accessible to you are things in the language in which you've studied. So I mean, I've studied some Hebrew. I lived in Iran for years, so I spoke Persian pretty well at one point. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Malaysia, teaching math in the Malay language. So I knew a fair amount of Malay. Studied Chinese for about a year and a half. I can say very little. I once learned about 300 characters, which is probably what the average 6-year-old knows. But those kinds of things are to a certain extent reflected in the language. But the combination is unique. There is no language that has all of these properties. And also, I took things to a much greater degree than is found in some other languages. So, for example, all the verbal morphology, the conjugations, tenses, aspect, things like that, everything is done in Navi, not by using prefixes, which is taking a root and putting something in front, not by using suffixes, but by using infixes. So in Navi, to change verbs from present to past or from continuing to completed, you stick something in the middle of the verb. So the verb for hunt, say, is taron, T-A-R-O-N, that's the root. To say that hunting has been completed, it's tolaro. So you take the O-L, put it in the middle. To say that you may hunt is tivaro. To say you will hunt is tayaro. To say I have hunted it and I'm happy about it is talareo. So do some Earth languages do this? Yes, but not to the extent that Navi does it. So that's some of the innovation.
How are you pronouncing good day?
Trrlefbo. Yeah, so the double R is a very strong trill and you're going to have fun with it. So trrlefbo. Trr means day. Lefbom is an adjective meaning enjoyable.
I really wanted to see if you were going to roll the R like I thought. So.
Trrlefbo. Yeah, that's fine.
It's not an Eartha Kitt influence.
What's that?
It's not an Eartha Kitt influence.
You know, I never thought of that, but I bet she'd be very good at that.
She would be very good.
She'd be fantastic. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, not being dead.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.